we're here to talk about, well, what is the future of travel, first of all, in Scotland and beyond? Whatever emerges from the conversation, I'm curious to see. But I would love it if Greg, you can just introduce yourself, maybe give your initial thoughts on the answer, and then Aeneas, I'll let you introduce yourself and some initial thoughts, and we'll just, have a good wee conversation.
Okay. My name is Greg. I'm the CEO and founder of Bike for Good. Yes, so I learned to ride a bike about when I was 30 years old. I went over Phobia, it changed my life, and I discovered cycling in a city that was not made for cyclists. So I've been fighting the last 10 years to make sure that we try the best we can to get more cyclists in Glasgow. So I don't know if I'm going to teach you a lot because, maybe to Stuart, but there's two people here from living in Holland, so they might be like, wow, they're like in the best place for cycling. But I don't know how cycling is in Orkney, but I guess it's quite little. But anyway, you're in Glasgow as well anyway. So yeah, do you want to tell me about the future of cycling, of cycling, of cities?
Oh. What are you saying there, Greg? Well, we're just looking at the future of travel. So some initial thoughts on how you see biking might fit in the future.
Yes, actually, it's not biking only, but I think it's everything around should be interconnected, the best cities to travel should be like, of course, green travel, but you could use bike as well as public transport, as walking, as scooters, or whatever you want, or even car share, because I'm not against cars, but we should share cars because, when most people cars, I park 95% of the time. So it's really a waste of time and money to buy a car. You just leave it parked there. So car share, public transport, bikes, scooter. So it's about having everything interconnected. And when you think that had the statistics, I need to find it, in Scotland, hold on, I get it. Sorry, yeah, I've got it here. I've got some good statistics. In Scotland, the transport is 27% of emission of CO2, okay? 90% is road. So imagine if you reduce the use or car usage on road, how much saving can make. And I found that as well in the UK, 52% of the journeys are under 5 kilometers. 5 kilometers is equivalent to cycling 20 minutes slowly, and actually even 25% of the car journeys are under 1 kilometer. So so this is where I could see the cycling fitting in really well, and people always talk about safety, and that's what we do at Bike4Good. We teach people cycling skill on roads, but how do you feel, people around this table, if one day we say, oh, here's a car, drive to work, and we don't teach you how to use a car? Not even to use the car, but how to use a car in the street. Your safety will be like, oh, I'm scared. You wouldn't want to drive a car. But that's the problem. We found out at Bike4Good, as soon as we teach people how to cycle a bike in the streets, it's so much easier. They feel so much safer because they know how to use it. So yeah, it's important to integrate cycling and reduce. Cycling could reduce these more journeys, these 25%, which is thinking like by 2030, I think 50% of the world population will be in cities. And it's probably lots of people who's going to use a car for more journeys. And if they don't have access to a bike or they don't know how to use a bike in the streets, then they're not going to use a bike. So yeah. Oh, sorry, you just start the conversation, but please keep going,
No, well, I love it because your initial thoughts, what you're saying there, Greg, before we move to Aeneas, is that we really need to reduce car emissions, accounting for 27% of the UK's emissions. And a lot of the times we're using cars for short journeys. And if we know how to use bikes effectively, we're trained, and I'm quite surprised because learning how to ride a bike and doing your cycling proficiency was actually part of my primary school as a child. So, you got the cycling safety. So it's interesting to see that that's maybe changed.
Exactly.
If we teach people how to ride bikes, then they can do so safely, and we can kind of like change the way that we maybe commute in short term in the cities. And Aeneas, you're going to have a completely different perspective to this, where you come from, your background. So I'd love to hear where you're coming from and where you think the future of travel is going.
Yeah, thank you, Tabby. My name's Aeneas O'Hara, and I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Away from the Ordinary. And Away from the Ordinary is a tailor-made travel company. So we do bespoke, tailor-made travel for individuals, couples, groups coming to Scotland, and we plan the whole itinerary for them. And so we talk a lot about regenerative travel, and regenerative travel we think is where we help our customers to do more good than possibly other travellers when they come to Scotland. So we're always looking at where possible, have them staying with smaller companies, have them working with small companies in the Highlands, and also thinking about the locations that we send them, like wilderness reserves like Allerdale, or entities that are working with Cairngorms Connect to replant indigenous forests in Scotland. So we're kind of looking at it as a kind of holistic approach, I guess, for the travellers that we bring into Scotland. And we're partnering with the likes of Trees for Life as well, who have a huge replanting program of indigenous trees in the Scottish Highlands. So that's kind of who we are and where we fit in. And then I'm obviously delighted to talk about the future of Scottish travel as well.
So what's your initial thoughts then, Aeneas, on the future of travel? I mean, Greg is saying we need more bikes and more effective ways of public transport, car sharing, in order to shorten those journeys, or to use different transport for shorter journeys. I mean, what's your perspective then from a place of regenerative travel, especially around tourism?
Yeah, so at the moment, a lot of our clients are driven rather than drive themselves when they come to visit Scotland. They're used to driving on the other side of the road, and they just want to enjoy their time in Scotland. So we have some of the drivers that we use, they're using electric vehicles like Teslas. And I guess in the Highlands we're seeing more and more charging points for electric vehicles, but it still requires a bit more forward planning in terms of where you're going to charge your electric vehicles. But we feel that the progress that's been made in terms of batteries, battery life, etc., is going to help that in terms of bigger vehicles being able to transport people over longer journeys with less charges. So we're talking with some of our guides who have bigger vehicles, can take more people in those vehicles, about at what stage in the next few years they think it will make sense for them and be viable to have electric vehicles. So that's one thing that we're looking at in terms of that. Most of our journeys are a lot of our journeys on our clients' itineraries are like 3-hour journeys. So from Edinburgh up into the Highlands, and then from the Highlands maybe over to the West Coast. For the types of travel that we do, we still need vehicles, but where possible we also put clients on trains, local train travel as well, which are very scenic journeys in Scotland. But obviously the rail network's not what we would like it to be at the moment in Scotland.
So I'm hearing a real issue about infrastructure there, and I'm curious, Greg, as well. I mean, what kind of infrastructure is needed in order to shift us into this? You were both very clear on the future really is more biking, more public transport, more car sharing, but electric vehicles as well, especially for longer journeys. What's the infrastructure needed for cycling and greater electric vehicles, Greg, from your perspective?
Well, it's interesting because what I hear from, infrastructure is needed because I know I talked about like, okay, to drive a car, you have to pass a driving license, fair enough. But you remember the roads are made for cars at the moment in the UK, at least, you know. So there's no specific infrastructure made for bikes like you may see on Holland or in Denmark. There's hardly any, you know. So here, roads for cars, priority, so it doesn't feel safe. So imagine a world where we will have first drive places for bikes, and then we say, oh, where do we fit car in? You know, it would have been different. And the same over Scotland. But it's interestingly, Ines, what you talk about the alternative transport, because we do all our cycling holidays with a family, 2 kids. My first kids was 3 years old, no, 3 months old when he did his first tour on the Western Isles. You know, from Western Isles, we cycled all the way to Aban, took a boat all the way around to Scotland. And then and then now we got 5 years old and the 2 years old in trailers. Soon the other one's going to be on the bike. And we do all holiday cycling. And everybody who's been cycling in Scotland, they said they love it. You can camp anywhere. It's amazing. So there's lots of cycling facilities. So I wonder, if you want to put that in your brochures, but I can help you if you want some advice. And Sustrans got amazing cycle routes. So even in rural areas, cycling could be really important. There's lots of research, I don't know, you can find on Visit Scotland, they did research. Cycling in Scotland could bring billions to the industry because you go through small villages. And so the infrastructure for cycling in Scotland rurally is there because there's hardly anyone in the roads, you know. And wherever there's a big road, there's a cycle path from Sustrans. And I cycled to Trees for Life actually years ago with my team at work, and we spent 4 days planting trees and we cycled back. And so it's all doable. Then in cities, yes, so we need more infrastructure because I just say the roads are currently made for cars as a priority. And if we want to reduce these small car journeys, we need to change the priorities entirely. Because building more cars, more roads just bring more cars, bring more congestion. It's been proven many times. It doesn't reduce congestion, bringing more roads. And personally, I don't think electric cars are a solution. I just replace them because when you talk about electric cars, they pollute somewhere else. Okay, as a cyclist in the city, I don't have the bad fumes in my head, but what are they? They're a big piece of plastic thing full of lithium batteries or maybe hydrogen soup, but they're not recyclable, they're not repairable, they're not sustainable. Electric car shares, yes. If people share, you have one electric car for so many households, you share it, yes. But just to everybody replace car by electric cars, that's not going green at all. That's just like greenwashing, I think. And when you think that the bike is the Scottish invention, you know, 200 years old, the most simple innovations that actually in 10 years of Bike for Good, I never had one person who took the bike and gave up on the bike and said, you know what, bike's not good for me, I don't want to give it. They all love it. But how many times I have people, I have friends, I'm frustrated, I'll be stuck in traffic, I don't like my car, or it costs me money, or somebody bash my car, or I have to do my MOT. Cars are stress, bikes are happiness. And as people, you can prove it many times, you know. So that was my rant about cars, you know, as you will be expecting from a cycling organization. But I'm not against car. I use car share in the city, and this is great. So car share connected with bike shares, amazing. I use a car when I need to go. If I need to go shopping, I need to go hiking in the mountain, I go bike access, I take a car, but I share the car. Yeah. Sorry. It's okay.
No, I don't think there's any need to apologize there.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's really interesting because what you're bringing in the point in terms of the future of travel, you're touching on it. And you mentioned this, Aeneas, when you kind of like started. It's unsustainable for everybody to have an individual car, you know, and I know that one of the conversations I was having with Peter Paul, when we were talking about rewilding the way that we think, and I think this was off record, he was saying, but yeah, you're introducing electric vehicles into the ecosystem, but what's then happening to the petrol cars? Well, they're getting sold on. Does that just mean that there's more and more cars on the road to that point that you're making there, Greg? And we really need a fundamental shift in terms of what we think about car ownership. You know, is it something that's stressful? Is biking happiness? And you had said there, Aeneas, even in terms of the people that you're working with to do the tours, you're actually looking at how do we use and bring in bigger groups. So you're even, I suppose, looking at how do we car share as we do regenerative travel within Scotland?
Yeah, I think just Greg, one point is that the electric car is a Scottish invention too. As
Oh.
a bicycle, we invented everything, including marmalade. So, but yeah, I mean, look, I'm from the Highlands of Scotland, and it's totally impractical to cycle 50 miles to do your shopping and come back home with to feed a family of four on a bicycle. So you're talking about it from a city perspective, and that's totally fine. I've been on holiday to Copenhagen, visiting friends there, and we spent the whole weekend cycling, and they had their two children under 3 years old in the buggy at the front of the bicycle. So I do totally agree with you that the infrastructure for cycling needs to change in Scotland, like it is in Copenhagen or it is in Amsterdam. Yeah, and in terms of cycling holidays, there are a lot of great companies doing that really well already. I think one of our focuses is on, being from the Highlands of Scotland. I think employment in small communities and keeping those communities vibrant. To Greg's point, if it's a cycling holiday, you will stop in smaller villages and spend money there. So it's great for that local infrastructure. So we're also focused on how we can have our clients spend in those money in those smaller communities and keep jobs there. And there are a lot of great companies looking at that, like creating, whiskey's a big passion of mine, and there's people starting distilleries in places like Raasay, places like Ardnamurchan, places like the Outer Hebrides, because a lot of these landscapes can be slight, there's not a lot of employment, but tourism can be a force for good in these places, and tourism can play a role in helping young people find meaningful employment in those locations. So I think not everyone, but a lot of visitors to Scotland will be thinking about, how can I travel in a responsible manner? How can I give back more than I take away from my trip? Because travel's still going to be here for a long time. It's obviously exploded in the last 20 years, and the internet has fueled the way we travel. Social media has fueled the way we travel, where we go, what we want to take pictures of, where we want to be seen. And Scotland's beautiful landscapes is very Instagrammable. So it's how do we manage this? It's going to happen, and how do we manage it? And I think what Greg's doing is great. I would love to put my clients in Glasgow or in Edinburgh and have them cycle. But I'd have to have confidence that they won't go in a pothole and end up having an accident. But yeah. One company I wanted to mention, just in case it's of interest to people. There's a company called Invisible Cities, and Invisible Cities basically are a company that work with people that have experienced homelessness, and train them to be tour guides in Edinburgh and Glasgow. And so in 2022, we're going to start offering their tours to our clients as well. So for me, regenerative travel is also about environment, but it's also about where our clients going to spend their money when they're traveling in Scotland, and we can direct them to spend that money in different places that do good socially, and not just with huge entities and huge corporations.
Really glad that you've brought in that point, Aeneas, and you've kind of widened it, because one of the things that has emerged in the earlier conversations that we've had on future mobility, but also yesterday, is this link between social and environmental, how it's not one or the other, it's both and how can you actually travel in a way that's helping everybody within a community actually come together, have jobs, have employment. And I think that's the same, for you, what you're talking about, Greg, with the community aspect. I mean, it's creating the community aspect within cities, but also within a wider level within the countryside, of being able to create strong, resilient networks, interconnect them more. And I think it's really interesting, because the last conversation that we had today was very much touching on what does social mobility look like. And I suppose that, bringing it in, because it's kind of been touched upon here in terms of the future of travel. Future of travel is also about social mobility. And how do you see regenerative travel, Aeneas, for example, becoming more widely available for everybody? Because if you're creating, and I'm making an assumption here in terms of the conversation, if you're creating bespoke travel, then that means that people have got a high level of disposable income in order to be able to do adventures like that and exploration, and that's not open to everybody. So how do we help those, you mentioned Invisible City, how do we help those people be able to experience the same level of travel as well? And Greg, something for you to think about as Aeneas answers is, I'm curious then of how cycling can be made more accessible to everyone. And the reason that I'm asking that, is like throughout the Forth Valley, and I've just moved here, it's great. They've got a cycling network that's set up, but it's £2 an hour, or it's £2 for a 45-minute bike side. So already you're setting up, exclusions in terms of social mobility and people's access to communal travel. So how do we fit this in and address this moving forward, Aeneas?
Yeah, I mean that's a that's a very complex question, but I think I think for a lot of people, life is busy enough, right? We're trying to make ends meet. We've got the kids, we've got the job, we've got all these different things. So I think companies and government have to work hand in hand to make things easier, right? So to Greg's point, it should be easier to cycle in Glasgow and Edinburgh. You shouldn't be worried about hitting a pothole and veering off or getting a puncture. We should be thinking about how we can have meaningful jobs in the country, in the Scottish Highlands, in Orkney, wherever it is. And I think that I was I was in Inverness the other day, and I was really heartened to see they're building a new train line um, up in Inverness, which I didn't know about. So that's amazing. So I think public transport is obviously big as well. Like if you're up in the Northwest Highlands, it's rare that you'll see a public bus going by. So if you want to um, if you want to plan your trip to the Scottish Highlands using public transport, that requires a lot of forward planning, and there's a lot of cars on the roads, as we've already mentioned. So I think public infrastructure needs to be there to help that. But I think decisions need to be made. Life takes a lot of time. Just getting through life with work, job, kids, whatever it is, other responsibilities. So the green decisions need to be made easier for people to make. People should be guided to make easy choices that aren't more expensive. It shouldn't be much more expensive to buy organic food, all these sorts of things. It should be easier for people just to do it as part of their way of life. I know I'm not really answering your question, but it's kind of I think the onus has been put on individuals to make these green choices, but I still think the responsibility lies with governments and big corporations.
Mm.
um, I think it's been quite a savvy move to push the onus onto individuals to save the planet, but it needs to be big corporations and big governments that take on this responsibility, which is, I guess, part of COP26.
Mm. And I mean, I kind of think you're answering the question, because when you ask a complex question like that, and I apologize because that's kind of like big questions there. you can't give a simple answer. And I mean, what you're really saying is if we actually want to make travel sustainable for everybody, we need greater collaboration between big business, big government, and the individuals and the locals to put in the necessary infrastructure that actually makes this available to everybody.
Yeah.
Curious to hear your thoughts.
You froze.
My interconnection was a little bit unstable there. So I was saying, I'm curious, Greg, to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I was wondering, yeah, no, it's very interesting because then I realized halfway through that between myself and Aeneas, we come from rural and city perspectives, which is interesting, you know. It's really interesting because even tourism is different in between city and rural. And I totally agree that if I was living in the countryside, I will need a car. I will probably try to share it as much as I can, but I will need a car. I mean, it's no, you know, cycle. It used to be the old days where, which is interesting because we go cycling in France as well a lot because my family is in France. And in France, every small village still got a market or well-stocked shops. And I don't know what happened in Scotland, but lots of villages, they have anything, not even a shop, and big enough villages, which makes it really difficult for cycling. Sometimes you have to plan lots, you know. But anyway, yeah, I was thinking maybe it would be nice to hear from, if you don't mind, Tabitha, to hear from other people in the room as well, no? To see if they want to bring anything. Do you think it's a good idea?
Yeah, I'm happy to shift
I'd
the
love
focus.
to hear what they think or what they want to bring in, if it's okay.
Well, hi, I think that Tabby's frozen again. Oh, never mind, it's back. So as we said earlier, we do live in the Netherlands, and obviously it's known for having a great network with bikes. But what we've come to realize is that most people actually drive to work. They don't usually cycle to work. And the public transportation system here is incredibly expensive. Like, it is so expensive. So I think that this is a problem that a lot of countries are facing at the moment, is trying to reconcile public transportation, so giving people the social mobility and accessibility to cheap public transportation, while also providing them with the means to be able to make the choice to actually cycle to work or cycle wherever they need to go. So yeah, I think that was just my observation with regards to our personal perspectives from the Netherlands.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I feel like it's just generally important. I feel like in the Netherlands, why so many people actually drive to work by car is because there's so many cities and people often don't work in the city they live in. And I feel like that's also a problem like in rural areas, because it doesn't matter where it is, not just in the Netherlands. There aren't that many rural areas here. There are lots of big cities. But generally, because of course, the further the distances, the harder it is to cycle, for example. Because I don't know, I personally just don't find it super comfortable to bike into work and then be super sweaty when I arrive there. Yeah, I feel like it is, as Juliet said, like it's important to have the choice to also take public transport and have a green option to driving by car. But I feel like also car sharing, for example, like I think that's generally like a great thing. Just only really works in cities. If you're not in a city, it's really hard to find those car sharing, because like how many people would actually participate, like 3 or 4? So that also means you're not 3 or 4, but like a couple people, I guess. So you only have a few cars standing around that are never close by. So yeah, I feel like it seems like it's a bit easier to solve in cities, but gets a bit harder in rural areas or where people have further distances to.
Yeah, especially because of the costs. So in countries where public transportation is nationalized, it's fine because the state's going to cover the costs. But for example, like I come from France as well, and there was a movement a couple years ago where they were trying to privatize certain buses. And so they decided to shut down a couple of the bus paths, I guess. And that meant that a few of the villages no longer had access to public transportation at all, which meant that a lot of like elderly people who can't drive because they no longer are allowed to, were just stuck in the village and didn't have access to big cities because taxis are incredibly expensive. And so, yeah, I think that there's a problem there that does need to be reconciled. So what are your thoughts on that?
Who's first? Or
You can
it's-
go. You've unmuted yourself, Greg.
Okay, right. No, it's really, really interesting to find that is in Venice country, people are saying there's still the same issue about driving to work. It's really interesting. I wonder if but it's funny because I was in a protest in George Square this morning in Glasgow. It was about privatizing public transport as well and connecting it with bike share, with everything. And because it's so expensive for people and it's really difficult. And you're right, for long distances, you can't take your bike if you have to walk 20 miles away, you know, and most people do because they want to live near families and the work is there, or you buy a house, but you change job. You're not going to change house every time you change job, you know. Yeah, it's difficult, but yeah, it's what I was saying at the start. I think something more interconnected would be so important, and maybe not free, but heavily subsidized, or depending on your income, you know. So imagine you can go and you really far. Imagine how easy you can walk to the train station next to your house, to the tram or to the bus, get the bus and do the last 2 miles by bike. If you need to, you can walk it, you know, but something easy. I think Aeneas was saying something, make it easy. And I totally agree with, bring back to what Aeneas was saying before, is the government choices. Because the government choices, they put lots, billions on roads, they subsidy fossil fuel companies, they don't subsidy much on green travel, you know, so it's just the government need to support us to make it easy, you know, because we can try our best, but if we don't get the support, it's really difficult. What do you think, Aeneas?
Yeah, I think I think I think it is the future, and it should be made easier. And I think cost is a huge thing. You know, like cost matters a lot to most people, and most people have to make decisions, and we need to make those decisions easier for them to make, if that makes sense. And I do think that we should be looking at easier public transport, but yeah, like you said, everything, you move house and then you change job and then you got to travel, so it's just got to be made, like, I agree, interconnected and easier. And I just think and how people balance budgets for that, with public transport in the Highlands, where you have 2 buses a day going past your road, etc. And it's a huge it's a huge jigsaw to solve.
And I'm curious, Stuart, from your perspective, I mean, you've talked about 20-minute neighborhoods before where everything is in one place. And I'm wondering if this is part and parcel of the future of travel, because what I'm hearing in the conversation is very much a systemic issue that's going to require a lot of collaboration. So how do 20-minute neighborhoods fit into the future of travel?
Well, that's sort of like kind of what Aeneas was saying, and what Greg was saying. So instead of people working really far from where they live, it's like you worked really close to where you live. And then that sort of by nature cuts down the sort of transport. And then within this neighborhood, you'd ideally have public transport, and you'd have good cycle networks that would sort of lead you to all these places. And it's designed in theory to cut out all the stuff we're talking about. In theory, it's like this little idyllic utopia where it could work perfectly, but I don't know if there's the funding or the sort of practicality in place that they could function properly. I think a lot of these neighborhoods would just still end up being dominated by cars, which is a sort of, I don't know, an invasion on space. I find that if 2/3 of a space outside is used by a car, and then a pedestrian's only provided 1/3 of the space, then you sort of lose this potential danger, and every street is this danger. So I'd like to see more public transport, because especially in Glasgow and stuff, if you look at it, like, I can't cross the street, I have to stop and wait because I am banned from this potential threat of a car hitting me at every moment, and I'm stuck instead of this. You know, if it's a 12-meter space, there might be 3 meters of pavement and then 9 meters of cars, and then it's sort of a dominated space, and there's no sort of translation to who's using the space and what do we want it to be used for, instead of it's just used as a method to get somewhere else. That's what I was thinking. That's not the 20-minute question thing, 20-minute neighborhood, but I was just curious about in urban areas. I don't like the car dominance. I'd like to see more dominance of cycle networks, trams. Glasgow apparently used to have a wonderful tram network and it was demolished, but then nobody wants to invest in it because there's not money in it. And especially in the Highlands, I think it was Beeching who destroyed most of the rail networks in Scotland. So that would have been nice to have still in Scotland and keep it quite connected. Because then even if you were to have in the Highlands, a 20-minute neighborhood wouldn't be possible because it's just not how it is. I mean, my mum was there and I lived in Orkney, but if you had a rail network, you could have a 20-minute neighborhood where you travel to the next village, or you travel from your village to Inverness, and maybe that idea of a 20-minute neighborhood would be that you travel to the larger destination to then come back to you, but it would still be plausible. And that would probably be more probable than creating an entire new village as a 20-minute neighborhood.
I noticed that you were unmuting yourself there, Aeneas. I was wondering if you were wanting to come in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I think that the pandemic has accelerated a lot of things from a technology point of view. So we're all more comfortable with video calls than we were 2 years ago, etc. And it'll be interesting to see. We're obviously kind of getting back to a more normalized situation like we were pre-pandemic. There may be future lockdowns again. If needs be from a health perspective, but it'll be interesting to see if that work kind of life balance changes, in that we only need to go to the office 2 days a week or 3 days a week if we have got an office job, and if that'll then mean that there is less pressure on the roads network or less pressure on public transport. So, from my perspective, all the people that work we're very small, but all the people that work away from the ordinary work from home. So there's no commuting involved, and we all meet up on Zoom or on calls, etc. I do think that's very difficult for young people coming into the workplace that have never worked anywhere before. I think being in an office environment is much more supportive and helpful to structure people's days, etc. But yeah, I think technology can help in a different way, right? So we've been talking about what the transport options are, but maybe also one of the things to look at is how we stop people having to make those 30-minute journeys in the first place. And then I think, from a cultural point of view, I wonder if it's kind of, if you get on public transport, everyone's on their phone. And so I feel like we're always more interconnected, but we're also more kind of closed off. So I wonder if it's more difficult for people to think about public transport and car sharing than it would have been 2 generations ago, because society's changed so much that we're more kind of just want to be in our own space, if that makes sense. And that's not a helpful addition at all to this conversation, and I apologize, but it's just making me think about society, working from home, technology, and people's views on sharing stuff,
Yeah, but I do think it is a helpful addition to the conversation here, Aeneas, because we've been talking about some of the different ways that travel will change, and what you're really highlighting is how we need to start thinking differently about travel, and it comes back to that notion of interconnectedness and systemic thinking. There's a fundamental reimagining of the way that we live, work, play that needs to happen in terms of how we want to engage with the world. And what you're making a really interesting systemic point of saying we can't actually solve the travel problem if we don't address how people are working. let's look at that, and from that perspective, I don't, myself, I don't understand the logic of having a house and then going and traveling somewhere else to spend all day working somewhere else when then there's a building staying empty, so it's this nature of systemic issues that are kind of coming in. And that for me, I think, is the most important point about social mobility and the future of mobility. This isn't something that's got a short, simple answer. It's incredibly complex. And, I'm curious where both you and Greg think the priorities need to be as we're moving forward in future. You've kind of alluded to some of this. It's like we need to think differently. We need to reimagine the way that we work. We need to, make sure that governments are on board. Let's look at the cost and make sure that it can be inclusive for everybody. But I'm curious what else is coming up. And I'll come to you, Greg, first.
Okay. Yes. I think Jimmy, you want to speak after. I have some point of his hand raised, but
perfect. Well, we can go to Jimmy first.
Okay. Oh well, you could go for it, Jimmy. Sorry.
Very much. I reckon my input here is going to be extremely selfish. There's a growing population of elderly, of which I'm one. I'm very much, listen, word. I don't have a great deal of time. So because I do so much voluntary stuff, I don't think any of my volunteering is within 6 miles of where I live. So I transport myself. I can't walk because of my age and the infirmities I have. So I do need a car, although I have in fact considered buying an electric trike or an electric scooter. But I can't get one that will go above 4 miles an hour because the UK has a ban on it. For it to be functional, for me, it'd need to go at 25 miles an hour minimum. I can't go from where I am, although I've got a free bus pass, I can't go from where I am in the West End to where I want to volunteer in the North Side without going on 3 or 4 different buses, which takes time. And if I travel across the north of the city, I'm in rural roads that don't have any footpath or pavement. Therefore, if I was on a bike or an electric scooter doing 4 or 5 miles an hour, I'd be a hindrance more than a help. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, these are all great ideas, but there's hundreds of thousands of old pensioners like myself that won't fit into this new ideal. And I'm just puzzled as to how that's going to square the circle. And have they ever been considered in any of your desires to green the nation? I mean, I'm volunteering during COP26, and the amount of detours I'm having to take to go to my voluntary duties is immense. Normally, I would just zip along the expressway, but because of security aspects, I'm not allowed to go anywhere near it. So all of these different things are impacting, and I just wonder, I know it sounds controversial, but a lot of green technology doesn't take into consideration. I looked at an electric car a couple of weeks ago, and it's 3 times more expensive than the car I'm actually, I've bought. I can't get a cheap electric car. It's not cost effective. Told you it would be selfish.
I don't think it's selfish, Jimmy. I think you're bringing in a valuable addition to the conversation of how do we practically make sure that it's inclusive. It's the wider issue. How do we make sure that elderly people are included in this? And I'm curious, we'll come back to you, Greg. You might want to continue what you were wanting to say, or you might want to build on what Jimmy was saying.
No, the Jimmy input is great, because listening to everybody here, I think people take a car because at the moment, the way the world is made, the cities, the infrastructure, it's easier, You don't want to have to go to work, to go shopping. You take your car, you go wherever. You go take your car, you go on holidays. It's easy. But it looks like whether it's for Jimmy, the pensioner, or someone else, or Nina and Gillette, if they work far away, using public transport or bike, it's pretty complicated. And until we make it easier, I think NAS was saying that earlier, to make it easy. It's not going to work. And again, when I was saying it needs to be interconnected, whether you have the same card or whether it's free You need to be jumping on and off. If it's a 5G, so I need to get the change, the next bus stop. Where is my bus? Where is my thing? You're not gonna do it. It's like you don't have time for that. As we were saying earlier, people don't have time. It should be easy, simple. And I think the problem we have, if it's all interconnected, we can use now. Lots of people use service design. You heard about service design, like user-centric design, and speak to Jimmy, speak to Nina, to Stuart, to all of us here, and speak to say, okay, and make it user-friendly, compared to have all things not connected at all and really complicated, difficult, Speak to the people and make it for the people. If they want people to use public transport, if you want to sell a new product on the market, you're going to listen to your customer, you're going to do focus groups. But if you don't do the user journey, you never can understand. So reflecting all what you say, I think people will keep on using the car until things get simpler. But at the moment, the future of transport, we will hope to be more public transport, greener. It's bloody complicated. So even myself, I hate take the bus, and I take the bike everywhere in town because it's easier. But going, as you say, rural area, it's impossible. It's difficult. And no, when I was saying, I cycle everywhere with my kid and son and all that. But we are a few of us in the kind. It takes lots of time, lots of packing. How to know what you take packing is difficult. It's not easy to go on holidays. So it's not for us. We find it relaxing holidays, but it's not as easy as I say it is. So we need to make it. The future of transport to be green should be simpler. This is what I would say. Yeah.
And I'm glad to see that you've unmuted yourself and joined the conversation, Michael, because I'm curious, knowing that you actually have a design experience, what your contribution is to the conversation that's going on.
Thanks, Tabitha. Interesting conversation all round. I'm a service designer, UX designer. I have pondered this, and I've attended different events in Scotland over the last 4 years. CivTech ran a few different initiatives where they tried to address this. I think, like with most things, there's a part reimagining, and there's a part of this which is reverting back to what worked in the past. The travesty of an overly consumeristic, capitalistic society was that we threw away a lot of good stuff so people could have this idea of the better lifestyle. Wasn't it great that you can take your car everywhere? And we changed towns and villages and cities from being people focused to being car focused. I've actually moved out of Edinburgh city centre. I used to live in George Street, and I moved to a little village called Kinghorn on the east coast of Scotland, in Fife. As I tell people, I'm living my best Fife. It's a wonderful Fife, and the reason for that, Stuart, was to look at this 20-minute town village. I have actually everything I need. I realized that there was nothing. I had more than I needed in George Street. Certainly more distractions and noise. When the pandemic hit, we went to complete silence in my area. Princess Street Gardens was completely empty. It was like having my own grand gardens for a period of time. And then gradually the noise levels were creeping up and creeping up and creeping up and creeping up. And I was like, I got to get out of here. And so I'd been looking to move, and I've come to Kinghorn. And the way I look at it is like, I've worked with a lot of startups. I've had my own startups in field, and when I look at startups, there's a curve, the innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority. I think far too often we try to deal with the early, late, and laggards. Like take the bus service. Like we're trying to solve a bus service that is systemically already broken. We need to create a completely new service. We need an environment where we can test these ideas fully. Why does a bus stick to a certain route? Why can I not get a text message or an indication that it's going to come? Why can't the bus wait for me to come down and get it? Why is a bus running with no capacity when no one's taking it? Right? Whenever we've got, when we can completely reinvent that, redesign that. But you must do that in the innovator space. So a town like Kinghorn, I feel, is the perfect town for a lot of these initiatives to be trial piloted in. Why could we not create a completely new system of getting around the coast of Fife for residents in particular? Why should I have to walk more than 2 minutes to a bus stop? You know, if I have to go to the bus stop, I have to walk down. The bus goes every half an hour and I have to be there at least 15 minutes before the time it says, because they generally turn up early and they do not stop. They just plow on. Why does a bus even need to be a double decker? Why are there not more options depending on the capacity of the number of people that want to travel? Why can some journeys not be done? And that way you can create an electric fleet around that. You know, why can you not? Why are these vehicles? Why can I not? Why don't they have an area on them where you can park your bike and then collect your bike instead of, you know, why can't they facilitate me cycling up on my bike, putting my bike on that vehicle, getting to where I need to get and taking my bike off it again? I mean, it completely, as I say, we need a new, so forget about trying to fix the existing system. It's so broken, it's impossible. Get it to work in a small area where you can properly test that fully, get all the bugs out of the system, and then bring it to bigger towns and cities. Because if you get that to work right in Kinghorn and the surrounding area, that'll work in Glasgow, that'll work anywhere. And that way, you know, to address, you know, Jimmy's concerns, and that is like, he shouldn't have to, if he wants to get somewhere, he should be able to use a service that he can tell, I need to get from here to here. And so long as that service is, I mean, we've got GPS and all kinds of amazing things that should be able to work out every route that's possible. He should be able to get on that within, you know, within a suitable distance from his house to where he needs to get to. You know, so maybe that's a bit ambitious, but as I said, for me, I'd like to promote Kinghorn as sort of like the potential pilot project area for all of these new initiatives, and make Kinghorn the most sustainable village in Scotland, the world. And let's just change one area and bring everything, and bring in, you know, like for years I've seen about, you know, roads that were made out of solar panels that exist somewhere. You know, why not sourcing that, getting them in, running them as a pilot, creating new economies, new businesses in Scotland that can then produce these things on a much bigger scale. We've got to create a test bed for everything. Think about it like Expo 2020, but instead of it being in the most ridiculous place in the world, Dubai, being it in the most Scottish of places, Kinghorn.
Thank you, Michael. I think this has been a great ending to the conversation. And I don't know about anybody else, but what I've appreciated is the amount of time you've clearly been thinking about this, as you've been walking around Kinghorn, with the amount of questions that you've just kind of posed as food for thought here of, you know, this is not reimagining, this is starting from the ground up and building something that truly works based on the needs of people today. And, you know, I know for me, that's a really inspiring thought of how do we create a test bed. It builds really nicely into some of the conversations that we're talking about tomorrow in the future series on how do we use Scotland as a ground bed for innovation. You know, we're a small country. We've got a lot of great people. As Aeneas and Greg pointed out, we've invented just about blooming everything, you know, in the world. So maybe it's time that, I know you're like,
well, come on,
that's the
Scots.
Come on. I've I've got a book. I've got a book here, so it goes, and I'll read you the backdrop. What do television, pneumatic tires, steamships, the telephone, the women's movement, and antibiotics have in common? If you drive a car, have an operation, use a mobile phone, watch a TV, wear a raincoat, or have survived the flu, you've benefited from the work of an enlightened Scot. So, you know, kind of like ending on that. But I think the point is, irrespective of whether you're Scottish or whether you're embedded in Scottish and you're Scottish at heart, we've got the capacity for innovation. We've got the capacity for creativity. And I'm hearing the desire and the enthusiasm, not just within you, Michael, but within Greg, within Aeneas, within Jimmy, you know, Nina, Juliet and Stuart, of how do we actually reimagine the future of travel to make it work for each and every one of us. I know we're reaching the end of the time, the hour that we've had together, you know, and I feel that this is only a starting conversation. So I'd just like to hand it back to you, Greg and Aeneas, if there's any last comments and thoughts that you'd like to share as we wrap up today.
No, I thought Michael's questions were really great, really interesting. There's a train service up to the Highlands which is now launched, a carriage or half a carriage where you can load your bicycles on, and that just happened this year. So I think that ties in with what Michael was saying about loading your bicycles on onto buses, and ties back to Greg's first point, which was that we need interconnectedness of solutions. So thanks very much for having me. I'm coming away from this with more thoughts, more questions and more ideas, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Aeneas.
Yeah, same here. Made me think a lot. I totally agree with Michael as well. Testing, piloting, Kinghorn or whatever is a really good idea as well. And yeah, no, it reopened my eyes, this conversation as well, with the feedback as well that from Nina and Julia, that actually they all also drive to work a lot in Holland. You see the image, everybody says, no, look at them, better, you know. And no, it's interesting. Thanks for Aeneas to tell me that the electric car was Scottish invention, which now I feel bad when I go like saying it, but you know, I'm gonna have to be more careful on that. But no, it was really great. It opened my mind, and yes, and I hope you've already seen the image from Stuart on the link on the chat. Have a look. But I feel the same as Stuart when I'm going the street. Go click it if you haven't seen it in the chat box. You know, that's how I feel as well, Stuart. But yeah. Thanks, everyone. It was really
Perfect.
Good.
Yeah. And Heather's just adding there, what was the book? So the book is Scots Who Enlightened the World, which is a great read. That wasn't my intention to plug the book, but it's fascinating if you're wanting to understand a little bit more about what's going on in terms of the culture of innovation in Scotland. Thank you, everybody. Greg, Aeneas, especially for joining us for today's conversation. And thank you, Stuart, Jimmy, Heather, Michael, Nina and Juliet for joining and contributing to it. It's been great. Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Tabby.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.